As a powerful winter storm rapidly approaches the Ocean Ranger oil rig, almost no one is concerned about safety. After all, it was built to be almost impossible to sink. But it still sank, and eventually the reason why became clear. Sunday, February 14, 1982. As the storm was approaching from the south toward Newfoundland, a shore-based radio operator from Mobil Oil of Canada in St. John's contacted nearby offshore oil rigs to warn them. One of those who received the message was the Ocean Ranger, the largest semi-submersible oil rig in the world. Even though it was designed to withstand storms much stronger than the one approaching, the crew still decided to stop drilling as a precaution. They retreated to their quarters while waiting for the storm to arrive. By nightfall, the storm hit the oil rig with full force. But the Ocean Ranger was built strong, so it was able to withstand the pounding waves. The only thing that got damaged was a small window in the ballast control room. 30 minutes before midnight, the radio operator on shore received a normal weather report from the Ocean Ranger. There was no sign of any problem with the rig. Not even the slightest hint of the tragedy that was about to happen in a few moments. An hour and 30 minutes later, the senior foreman of the Ocean Ranger sent a report that the rig was severely listing. 10 minutes after that, he started sending out mayday calls. The nearby standby vessel immediately went to the location of the rig and found scattered and destroyed lifeboats. But because of the darkness and huge waves, they couldn't get close. The storm was too strong. 84 men from the oil rig were left at the mercy of the raging sea. By morning, the storm had subsided and the sea became calm again. A rescue helicopter flew to the area to search for survivors, but they did not find a single living person. The entire oil rig disappeared, leaving only the anchor buoys floating in the place where the Ocean Ranger once stood. The sea and the storm covered almost all traces of the tragedy that happened to this oil rig. But before we begin, if you're new to our channel, please subscribe so you'll always be updated with videos like this. On Valentine's Day in 1982, Ocean Ranger was conducting a drilling operation at exploration well J34 in the Hibernia oil field. It is located southeast of Newfoundland on the Grand Banks Plateaus. There were 84 workers on the rig at that time, and 56 of them were local residents. Because there were few jobs in the region and the oil industry paid very well, many young people from Newfoundland were encouraged to work here. Around 8 in the morning, the workers on the rig received a storm warning. According to the report, the wind was expected to reach up to 90 knots, and there could be waves as high as 37 feet or more than 11 meters. The crew immediately began preparing for the approaching storm. At around 4:30 in the afternoon, they stopped the drilling operations. The drilling pipe was removed and pulled back. Afterwards, the workers returned to their quarters while waiting for the arrival of the storm. At around 7 in the evening, a huge wave hit the nearby oil rig, Sedco 706. According to the workers there, the wave was much higher than expected. It reportedly reached between 70 to 80 feet or almost 20 to 25 meters high. Although it caused some minor damage to the structure of the rig, Sedco 706 was still able to withstand the intense storm. Another oil rig that was also conducting drilling at the Hibernia oil fields, the Zapata Ugland, was also hit by the same giant wave, but did not sustain serious damage. A few moments after the two rigs were hit, the massive wave reached the Ocean Ranger, which was even larger than the previous rigs. This is the largest semi-submersible oil rig in the world, so even a 70-foot wave should not pose a threat to its upper hull and drilling floor. The rig workers were confident about this. The Ocean Ranger is held in position by 3 strong anchor cables at each corner, so it can easily withstand strong and high waves. The only damage it sustained was a broken porthole window in the ballast control room located in one of the starboard columns. A radio operator from the nearby support vessel Seaforth Highlander heard the radio communication and personally witnessed the incident at around 8 o'clock in the evening. Within just a few minutes, the damage was also fixed. The crew covered the broken porthole and cleaned up the shards of glass. But that seemingly small and simple incident led to a much bigger problem. Because the glass broke, a large amount of seawater entered the control room and soaked the ballast control panel. This caused a short circuit, Since that panel controls the valves of the ballast tank, it started to malfunction. Because of the short circuit, the valves started opening and closing on their own. This caused water to go into the wrong tanks. What's worse, the ballast tanks are gradually filling up with seawater. If the ballast tanks contain more water, the rig will sink deeper into the sea and become more vulnerable to large waves. Senior ballast operator Donald Rathbun and his assistant Dominic Dyke tried to regain control of the panel. But every time they touched it, they got an electric shock. The only way for Rathbun to stop the valves from malfunctioning was to completely shut off the power. But there was one big problem. No one knew where the switch was. It was only around 9 p.m. when the electrician finally found the right switch and turned it off completely. At last, the malfunctioning valves were brought under control. By 9:06 p.m., the senior drilling foreman of Ocean Ranger, Jack Jacobson, contacted his colleagues at Sedco 706 and Zapata Ugland to find out how they were coping with the storm. He told them about the broken porthole, but also assured them that the rig's ballast control equipment was working normally again. An hour later, he repeated the same report to his superintendent, Merv Graham, in St. John's. The last radio communication that night was the weather report sent by the Ocean Ranger to shore at around 11:30 p.m. It did not mention any problems with the rig. There was no sign that just an hour and a half later, around 1 o'clock in the morning, Jacobson would be forced to call for help from the Coast Guard. In their radio correspondence, Jacobson reported that the rig was already listing heavily. It was already tilted forward by about 8 to 10 degrees, and the people needed to be evacuated. There was nothing else they could do to stop it from continuing to tip over. The rig was slowly sinking along with the 84 people on board. As the tilt worsened by the minute around 1:05 a.m., Jacobson contacted the support vessel Seaforth Highlander and asked for help. 5 minutes later, the radio operator of Ocean Ranger contacted the shore operator and asked them to send out a Mayday signal. The last message received from the rig came around 1:30 a.m. There will be no further radio communication from Ocean Ranger, and we are heading to the lifeboat stations. At that point, the rig was already tilted at almost 15 degrees, and there was no hope of saving it. The whole crew was already in the lifeboats. Even though the Ocean Ranger was already severely tilted, the men still had enough time to board the 3 fiberglass lifeboats, enough to accommodate all personnel before they were released into the raging sea. Those lifeboats had radios and were specially designed to withstand severe weather and icy seas. For the crew, that was their last hope for survival, or at least that's what they thought. As the lifeboats were being lowered from nearly 60-foot davits, they were struck by extremely strong winds reaching up to 80 knots. Because of the strong winds and the severe tilt of the rig, the lifeboats repeatedly slammed against the side of the Ocean Ranger until some of them cracked and broke apart. And the situation got even worse when the lifeboats reached the water. The crew had trouble detaching the lifeboats from the cables and hooks attached to them. While they were trying to detach them, the lifeboats were slowly filling up with freezing seawater. In these kinds of conditions, survival was almost impossible. By 2 a.m., the support vessel Seaforth Highlander arrived at the scene of the tragedy. They found only a single lifeboat floating with 8 men on board. Around it were scattered pieces of a destroyed lifeboat and abandoned life vests. The Highlander tried to approach the lifeboat, but it did not have enough equipment to carry out an actual rescue operation. So what they did was bring the ship as close as possible while the survivors tried to reach the side of the ship. But it was almost impossible to do that in the middle of the raging sea. As they struggled to reach the back of the ship, the survivors from the lifeboat fell one by one into the freezing water. Not a single one of them was saved. After 30 minutes, the first rescue helicopter arrived. But by that time, all 84 men from the Ocean Ranger had already perished due to hypothermia and drowning. An hour later, at around 3:38 a.m., the Ocean Ranger completely disappeared from the radar. The next day, even though helicopters conducted an aerial search and other rescue vessels arrived at the area, they did not find any clear trace of the tragedy. Only the anchor buoys were floating on the calm sea. In the following days, the search and rescue teams recovered 22 bodies from the sea. The examination revealed that all of them died due to extreme cold and drowning. 64 people were never found. All of them perished while trying to escape from an oil rig that was once considered unsinkable. Officials from Mobil Oil and the families of the victims could not understand how such a tragedy could happen, and eventually it turned out that it all started with a simple broken porthole. When the Ocean Ranger was launched in 1976, it was proudly introduced as the largest semi-submersible oil rig in the world, a rig that was said to be almost impossible to sink. It was built at the No. 2 EBA shipyard of Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, under contract from the Ocean Drilling and Exploration Company, or ODECO, of New Orleans, USA. The rig was first used in 1976 in the Bering Sea near Alaska. After that, it also operated in New Jersey and Ireland. In 1980, it was leased by Mobil Oil Canada Limited for $93,000 per day. At the Hibernia oil fields, the platform conducted exploratory drilling for the company. The Ocean Ranger was enormous. It was 396 feet long, 262 feet wide, and stood as tall as 337 feet. On top of it was the upper hull with 2 decks, where the accommodation area, drill floor, and helideck were located. The upper hull rested on 8 large vertical columns. Aside from providing support to the entire structure, these columns also housed various equipment, storage areas, pipes, ducts, and the oil rig's electrical wiring. In the third starboard column, you can find the ballast control room. Meanwhile, in each stern column, there is an elevator that connects the upper hull to the pontoons. The entire structure of the rig is further supported by an additional framework of braces and trusses to make it stronger against strong waves and winds. The Ocean Ranger is a semi-submersible type of oil rig. This means it does not stand directly on the seabed but floats on 2 large pontoons. These pontoons have compartments. These pontoons have compartments for the oil rig. By letting water in and out of these tanks, the height and balance of the oil rigs at sea can be controlled. This entire process is controlled by a system of pipelines connected to pumps and tanks, along with remotely operated valves monitored from the ballast control room located on the third starboard. The pontoons also have a pump room and a propulsion room at their rear section. Now, the big question is, how did a massive oil rig weighing 25,000 tons sink just because of a broken porthole that was only 12 inches wide? The truth is, the broken porthole only started a chain of events that was made worse by human error. Decisions that eventually pushed the Ocean Ranger toward disaster. After the ballast control panel got wet and the ballast tank valves started malfunctioning, Ratboone was able to temporarily control the situation by shutting off the power. But around midnight, the crew in the ballast control room turned the power back on. They thought the control panel had dried, so they wanted to remove the water from the ballast tanks to raise the upper deck of the rig and keep it away from the big waves. Unfortunately, that turned out to be a fatal decision. When the power was turned back on, the valves started malfunctioning again and allowed a huge amount of seawater to enter the tanks at the front, or bow tanks. Because of this, the rig began to tilt to the left at the front. When Ratboone realized what was happening, he tried to manually close the valves between the ballast tanks at the front and the pump room at the back, but he failed. In a desperate attempt to correct the situation and stop the rig from tilting further, he operated the pump to remove water from the front. But there was one important thing he didn't consider, or perhaps should have known as a senior ballast operator. It turns out that the rig's pump was a suction pump. Since it relies solely on atmospheric pressure, it can hardly pump water from a level lower than its own location. And that's exactly what was happening as the rig continued to tilt. As the front part of the Ocean Ranger sank deeper, it became lower than the rear where the pump was located. Instead of helping, it had the opposite effect. Because the valves were still open, even more water entered the bow tanks. In fact, it would have been better if Rathbun had prioritized draining the water from the ballast tanks closer to the pump room first. This way, the rig would have gradually returned to proper balance, and it would also have been possible to remove the water from the tanks at the front. But before they could fix the situation, the final blow struck the Ocean Ranger. As the entire structure continued to tilt, massive waves reached the end of the corner column at the port bow. That's where seawater began to enter the hollow column through a chain locker opening. Thousands of gallons of water quickly flooded inside the column, causing the rig to tilt even more. Narath Rathbun and his crew had no idea this was happening because the Ocean Ranger didn't have flooding sensors in its columns. When the rig tilted to 15 degrees from its normal position, it reached the point of no return. In just 3.5 hours, the largest semi-submersible oil rig in the world completely sank. Not only did the crew fail to stop it from sinking, they also didn't realize that some of the actions they took actually sped up the tragedy. On March 17, 1982, the Canadian Royal Commission launched an investigation to find out why the Ocean Ranger sank and why not a single crew member survived. For 2 years, they conducted an in-depth investigation, interviewed witnesses, recovered important parts of the rig from the seabed, and carried out various studies to understand the true cause of the tragedy. In their conclusion, it was revealed that aside from several serious design flaws in the rig, such as the lack of watertight hatches on the portholes and chain locker, Mobil Oil and Odeco also greatly neglected the importance of emergency preparedness. Worker training and safety were also neglected, and the Ocean Ranger lacked proper life-saving equipment. And the workers also did not know how to use the limited equipment they had. Some former workers of the Ocean Ranger even said that they did not receive proper evacuation training. The rare training sessions held back then were usually conducted only on Sunday afternoons and were not taken seriously. The commission also found that the people assigned to operate the ballast control system, which is crucial for the stability of the semi-submersible rig, were not required to have formal training according to existing regulations. In other words, the tragedy could have been avoided if the crew had been better trained and more prepared. In response to the Commission's report, the Canadian government implemented new and stricter regulations for the operation of oil rigs. These included relocating ballast control rooms to higher and safer locations, as well as using simpler ballast control systems to avoid complications during emergencies. Formal training for all ballast operators was also made mandatory. At the same time, the rules regarding worker safety and emergency preparedness were also made stricter. Lifeboat launching systems were improved and introduced as mandatory equipment. Immersion suits as well. These special suits are designed to protect a person against hypothermia when they end up in cold water for a long time, something that the crew of the Ocean Ranger did not have on the night the tragedy happened. In addition, every worker on the oil rig is required to undergo emergency evacuation training and learn how to use life-saving equipment. But even with all these changes implemented, it still did not ease the pain felt by the families of the victims. Many of them filed cases against Mobil Oil and Odeco due to negligence in providing proper training and adequate life-saving equipment, shortcomings that led to the deaths of 84 workers. In the end, the cases were settled and a compensation package worth $20 million was given. But it's sad to think that the number of lives lost because of the Ocean Ranger didn't end at 84. In June 1983, the Canadian government hired a company to raise the rig and sink it in a deeper part of the sea because it had become a hazard to passing ships. In that operation, 3 more divers lost their lives. 2 of them died due to an underwater explosion, while the other was hit by a falling object. Finally, in August 1983, the Ocean Ranger was permanently sunk into the depths of the sea. But it left behind the grief of the families of the 84 workers and the memory of a tragedy caused by severe human negligence.